Oh, hello. Welcome to our After Midnight Book Nook. I am joined here with someone I have been just absolutely admiring their channel.
You're tuned to Night Nerves, where if it's scary, creepy, thrilling, or disturbing, we read it, watch it, and talk about it.
This is Sam from Night Nerves. Sam, thank you so much for being here with us on Midnight Rental.
Thank you so much for having me, Laura. This is awesome.
The algorithm did something right for once and put your channel just in my feed randomly one night, and I just dove headfirst in because what you're doing is you're talking about books. I love watching movies, but as much as I love staying up late to watch movies, nothing is better to me than staying up late because I can't put down a good book. And do you want to explain to Midnight Rental viewers who may not be familiar with your channel what your channel Night Nerves is all about?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, Night Nerves is a YouTube channel I started about a year ago, and I envisioned it encompassing all forms of horror media, but I have a soft spot for books, and kind of similar to Midnight Rental, how you focus on a lot of lesser loved horror films. I kind of do that same thing with Night Nerves, where I like to look at a lot of more pulpy, lesser known horror novels, stuff that may be a little bit more campy or over the top. The tagline for the channel is if it's scary, creepy, thrilling, or disturbing, we read it, watch it, and talk about it. So everything from like quiet, spooky horror to like really disturbing splatterpunk or extreme horror, I like to talk about on the channel.
And that's what makes your channel so appealing to me is because you're talking about, a broader range, but still it's very niche. And the way you're speaking about the books, you're doing it in a very engaging way because that can be difficult with people who are talking about a medium that isn't a visual. It's easy to talk about movies because you can just like pipe in clips from the films and then people instantly can see what you're talking about. But when you're talking about a book, you have to present it in a way that is easy for the viewer to get sucked in, and you are so good at that. What was your inspiration for starting the channel? Was there a certain book in particular that you just loved so much? You're like, I want to put this out there, my love for it, and get other people excited about it.
Yeah, I've mentioned this at least once on the channel, but I don't in real life, I don't have a lot of friends that love horror as much as me. I don't have a lot of friends that read a lot. A lot of it was just like it felt like an outlet to talk about and nerd out about all these books that I like. And I wasn't even sure. I looked at, some other booktube channels and heard other people talk about stuff, but I was like, oh, I'd love to catalog all the books that I'm reading, what I think about them, because I'm sure you get this with books and movies, but sometimes we watch so many movies or we read so many books and it's hard to keep track of what we've read, what we haven't read, what we remember. You were talking about, I don't know if you'll include this in the
Oh
video,
yeah.
but you talked about leaving on the saver sticker just so you knew like, oh, I haven't read this book yet, and then you peel that off, and I thought that was really cool.
Well, like I have so I had set up this little, a display of books here, but I will leave books that I grab from half price
Nice.
savers, and then our
That's
half price
cool.
books puts them in these little plastic covers, and that's how, yeah, that's like my reminder to I have not read this yet, but it's on my in my to read queue.
Nice. Yeah, I'm looking at it. It's right across the room from me here in a stack.
So, what is your reading style? Do you try to carve out a time? Because I know we have so many distractions nowadays compared to even 20 years ago. There's phones, there's computers, internet that's always pulling our attention away, and it can be hard to shut it down and just get into a book for a lot of people. But that for me is when my mind feels most at peace. Do you have a set time that you say, I'm going to read for an hour today, or what is it something that just you organically do on your own?
Yeah, I'd say it's more organic. Especially with the channel now, I have more of an obligation. Recently, I've been sent some ARCs, which are advanced reader copies of books. And if I'm not up on those, the author will reach out to me and be like, hey, how's that book coming along? Are you done yet? So I definitely try to find little pockets of time to read, whether it's like on breaks at work, when I come home. I always will read before bed. I used to be more strict with this policy, but I have a no phone in bed policy when I'm going to bed. So I'll close off all the apps, shut it down, and then I put it down, I get in bed, and then I grab a book. There's just little things. Some days if I have like a weekend like today, and I'm like, okay, I want to get some pages in, I'll uh I'll just sit down and read for hours. I love watching movies, but since starting the channel, I have not turned on my television in a very long time. So if I'm not, I feel like right now it's like I work, I read, I edit videos for the channel, and I also write as well. So it's one of those three things that's happening when I have free time.
I absolutely understand that. And again, what was so appealing about your channel was the fact that you were talking about books, because what I do here at Midnight Rental obviously surrounds movies, but my first love has always been reading. And I, just as much as I love, like I said, staying up late to watch a movie, like nothing gives me greater peace, calm, and pleasure than just getting sucked into a book. But so, being that our episode is covering Love Gone Wrong, do you have any favorite picks about that subject that you'd love to highlight?
Yeah, yeah. And when you told me about what the episode is going to focus on, I thought of a lot of different novels. And like I said earlier, I don't know a lot of people that read, and a lot of times I'm always trying to motivate people to read. Another reason that it was motivating to start the channel, so I'm always like, oh, and I always say you should start with short stories. And it can sometimes be a tall order to get someone that doesn't read in general to just jump into a novel. So I was thinking of short story collections, anthologies, and I think Hot Blood, which is edited by Jeff Gelb and Lon Friend, is a great place to go if you're looking for some erotic horror. There's nothing really that erotic about it. It just kind of uses lust and sex as a vehicle for horror. But this has a pretty incredible roster of authors on here. I could probably list every one of these, but it's got Graham Masterton, Richard Matheson, Robert R. McCammon, F. Paul Wilson, Chet Williamson, Mick Garris, Ramsey Campbell, Lisa Tuttle, just a ton. Harlan Ellison, Gary Bradner, John Skip, Craig Spector. So many like just iconic horror authors, pulp horror authors are featured on here. And this was an intro for me to a lot of authors that I really like now. In particular, two stories that I would highlight in here that are some of my favorites are it's the Graham Masterton story. I believe it's called The Changeling or just Changeling, and Ray Garton's story Punishments. And this was my intro to Ray Garton, who has become one of my favorite pulp horror authors. Just a really cool, fun collection.
When that cover, just right off the bat, I know you're not supposed to judge a book by its cover, but I know you've also mentioned the covers sometimes are just like what suck you in, and that cover just right off the bat is so good. Where did you pick up that copy?
That is a very good question. Yeah, it's funny too. I get some people that'll ask me specific, like, "Oh, where did you buy these books?" And yeah, I'm I'm not sure. I brought also that this cover I think is the best one, but there's a whole series of these, and there's Hotter Blood
Oh my
also has,
God, that is amazing.
yeah. There's Hottest Blood, and then they keep going. They change you can't go past Hottest, so they
Scalding.
change it up for the other ones. I think there's like Seeds of Fear. Um, I can't off the top of my head, I can't remember the other titles in the series, but no, I totally that's a big thing on Night Nerves is before I started using Goodreads or the internet was really accessible when I was buying horror paperbacks and used bookstores when I was younger. I would literally just, if I was like, whoa, that's a really cool cover, I'm buying this book and I'm going to read it.
Yep.
So
I understand that so much because that was, I did the exact same thing. I was always sneaking books with me everywhere that we would go that was potentially boring and like church. And my best times have been at half price books, just digging through those little turnstiles with the old paperbacks that they think no one wants anymore. And when I knew we were going to talk about Jilted Lovers, I rediscovered that I had the R.L. Stine Broken Date classic and I reread it. And if those of you watching have not read some of R.L. Stine's earlier books that aren't, Goosebumps, this is a really fun one, and it's so funny that, within the first like 8 pages, like someone gets shot. I'm not spoiling anything because it happens in the first 8 pages, but it's just this is a really these old like Christopher Pike, R.L. Stine books, they're such a product of their time, but they're also so over the top. Like I think back to when I was a kid, like I was reading these just like what my mom had no idea. What was your gateway?
Yeah, it was so to my memory, the very first book I remember reading that was a scary book was there was I think it was meant for like first graders or like first or second graders, but there was a small anthology called In a Dark, Dark Room.
Yes.
Do you
Yes.
remember that?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do.
Yeah. So I remember that. I remember reading Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. And I think it was around second or third grade for me, but that was when I first saw a Goosebumps book on the shelf, sometime around there. It might have even been early, it probably was earlier, but I remember that like the first cover I remember, I think of when I think of the first one. I don't even remember the first Goosebumps book I read, but I think of the Haunted Mask. I think of that episode that traumatized me where there's a scene in that Haunted Mask episode of the TV show where she goes in the back room to look at masks where she's not supposed to be, and one of the masks winks at her.
Yes.
And it just completely terrified me. That mask is still, I think it's still pretty terrifying. So, but yeah, I didn't really read for pleasure before Goosebumps, and I remember it might have been a summer because I remember I had like a whole day, like a series of days to myself. I remember just like sitting down in my room and cracking open a Goosebumps book and just reading it, not really expecting much, just being like, oh, this is a cool cover. I want to check this out. And I remember at some point I was reading through this Goosebumps book. I'm like, oh my God, I'm gonna finish this book in one sitting. This has never happened before. I don't do this. And I would just like, I think that summer I read like multiple books in a day, and I just couldn't get enough.
And that's such a testament to why young adult fiction and, kids horror books like that, it is a perfect draw for a kid to get into reading. Whereas they, like you said, prior to that, you weren't really reading for pleasure, but like all it takes is that one book that just completely changes your view and can get you totally sucked into the world of reading. And it's so important that, I mean, there's so much credit to give to R.L. Stine. I was on the Goosebumps train as well. I remember like it was a ritual going to the bookstore when there was a new one coming out, and I had saved up my allowance. And I remember like doing that for the first 10. Like it was just such a monumental occasion when I could get a new Goosebumps book. But the first book, to your point of when you said that was the first time you were gonna like read a book all in one sitting, I remember I think I was in like fourth grade and I was just in love with Macaulay Culkin and Elijah Wood, and The Good Son had come out, and I wasn't allowed to see it, but they had put out the movie novelization of it, and I got it from the library, and I stayed up all night, even though it was a school night, I stayed up all night to read The Good Son. I thought I was so grown up. I was like drunk with power. Like I had like, and not only did I read this adult book that I wasn't supposed to be reading, but I had stayed up all night and powered through and went to school exhausted the next day. But do you have a particular movie novelization that I know when we were chatting before, you said that you had read the Basket Case novelization. Was there a initial movie novelization when you were younger that grabbed you?
Yeah, and it's funny. I wanted to touch on. I love that you said you weren't allowed to watch the movie. It
Yeah,
was The Good Son.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that was the same with me. I grew up, my parents did not let me watch R-rated movies. I couldn't even watch PG-13 movies when I was that age. So that was really like, I would watch those however I could. Like if I went over to a friend's house that their parents let them do whatever they want, I was like, okay, we got to watch like a lot of R-rated movies
You got to
over this
pack it in
weekend.
while you're there.
Yeah, yeah, you gotta get it all while you can. And but my parents didn't really care about books. So like in fifth grade was when I started reading Stephen King. And so on that note, once I found out about Stephen King, that was all I wanted to read. I was like, oh, he's the best. Why would I read anything else? And so I was around, middle school age at that time, and I saw the movie Jaws, which terrified me. And that made me want to pick up the book. And obviously the book came before the movie, but that was reading Peter Benchley's Jaws was the book that really broke me out of just reading Stephen King. And from there, novelizations were really a gateway into other horror novels because I read The Omen, which I've never seen the full movie of The Omen. It's kind of crazy that I've gone this.
I haven't either.
Oh, okay, good. It's not just me.
It's not true, no.
I know that is a novelization, though. I'm pretty sure, I think it's David Setzer that wrote that, and I think he wrote it after the movie. So, but it was very easy for me to watch movies, and it was always exciting to, if there was a movie, I also had limited screen time. Like my parents wouldn't let me sit around and watch movies. They'd be like, no, go outside, go play, or read a book. So if I wanted to spend more time with a movie that I really liked, I would buy the novelization of it and just read that and reread that.
Yes, I same across the board. I was not allowed to watch rated R movies. We didn't even have cable. So I completely understand all of that. And especially I think there is something that gets ingrained in us, those of us who grew up with parents not wanting us to watch R-rated movies. It makes you more hyper aware when you're a kid when you are viewing something that you're not supposed to watch. One, you're enticed by it, but two, you're then, because you're hyper aware of like, I'm not supposed to be watching this, you're really aware of like the blood and the gore and like why it's rated R. At least that's how it had the effect on me. So I felt in a sense that it made me more responsible about it. Like I didn't get desensitized to it versus like some of my friends who had cable with all the premium channels and they were just watching everything horrible and they're like, "Oh yeah, that's normal." I don't know. It does something to your head.
Yeah, yeah. No, I definitely had that sense of like, even if it was a really crappy B horror movie, like I really cherished the fact that I got to watch it and I appreciated it because I didn't have, access to all these other, I appreciated the special effects, the acting, even if it was campy. And that's one thing I really, really love about Midnight Rental is you celebrating these movies that otherwise people would be bashing on Letterboxd or on YouTube.
Oh,
And
I thank you for saying that. I never wanted to have the kind of channel like I don't want to bash movies. Like I feel like that's it's a very easy thing to do. And when someone makes something that's independent, that doesn't have a budget, nice mug, by the way.
Hmm,
Um, when
you.
someone make something that's independent and they don't have a lot of resources, they're doing the best that they can with what they have. And that includes Midnight Rental. I do not have a budget. Like I'm doing what I can with what I have. My set space is my friend's storage space that he's very nicely letting me use. Like it's so I still recognize even if something is campy or ridiculous, there's still effort that went into it. And I appreciate you saying that because I never want to bash movies. I feel like that's kind of an easy thing for people to do, like to get online and be like, oh, that that's so stupid, it sucked. And it's like, well, that still was someone's vision, even if it may have gotten away from them and it didn't come together. We can still look for what did work, maybe unintentionally, and celebrate it.
I'd love to add to that and say there's so many movies too that I've watched at one point in my life and been like, I wasn't in the headspace for it. And I was like, this wasn't good. Same with books. A story that I read or an author where I'm like, they're not for me. And then I revisit them later, or I revisit that movie a little bit later, and I have a completely different experience. And it happened this past December. I remember watching Krampus and not being very impressed by it. And I watched it this past December and I was like, oh my God, this is such a great movie. What was I thinking before? Michael Dougherty, yeah, who did Trick or Treat, also did Krampus. So, and I love Trick or Treat. So I think I had high expectations going into Krampus, and I felt let down. But again, I watched it this December and just really, really liked it. And I was just blown away. And I was like, oh, I can't believe I'm so glad I didn't go on the internet back then and be like, oh, this movie really blows. And
I mean, like to your point, headspace matters, and even hearing too much hype about something can affect the way my view might be skewed going into just viewing it. It's like I don't know if it's this like knee-jerk reaction in me where, oh, this is the best movie ever, you have to like it. And it's like, well, maybe I don't want to like it. And then I haven't even seen it yet, like but there's so much. I find myself, if it is a new movie, I don't even like to watch the trailer sometimes. If it's something that like I hear percolating about and it might be up my alley, I'm like, oh, if I watch the trailer, it might give away too much. So
yeah.
it's a fine line.
Especially nowadays, I feel like with trailers and just how they promote movies or how people review movies on social media, we're just inundated with so much. They're trying to give you so much information about these movies to get you to go to the movie. And yeah, I think just like one I've been avoiding as much like any reviews or trailers for right now is Companion,
Yes.
because Barbarian was so wild that I just want to go into Companion not really knowing. I saw the trailer because I was watching another movie and it was a trailer before that in the theater, and I yeah, I didn't have I wasn't I'm not I know it's funny, there's a podcast I listen to and he talks about he'll literally like cover his eyes and close his ears before the movie starts.
That's what I do. That's what I 100% do that.
I can't. Yeah, I like when I see, I'm always interested to see the coming attractions, but when it's one that I really want to see, I'm like, oh, I kind of wish I didn't see that, or
Just put your shirt
I
over
would
you.
regret it after watching. I'm like, oh, I wish I didn't know anything about that because I definitely am gonna see that no matter what the trailer looks like.
I forget what movie. What did we even go see? Just the like it was 2 or 3 weeks ago, and there was a trailer for Companion. And as soon as I saw the pink, I was like, oh no, this looks like something I'm going to love. And I did just that. I covered I covered my eyes. But Barbarian, I mean, I went into that totally blind. I hadn't seen a trailer. I tried not to read too many reviews, and that was so good. And I was in the right headspace to see it. I had just gotten out of a breakup, and it just was like well-meaning woman keeps trying to help men, and like it just, oh my God, I did not see where that was going. It was like I felt the same way when I watched The Descent. Have you seen Descent?
That one of my favorite movies.
I
So so good.
it was already like set it was starting off immediately with this horrible trauma, betrayal. Then they're stuck in a cave, and then, oh, I'm sorry, there's monsters down there. There's Are you kidding me? Like that just, ugh. But it gave me that same feeling.
Yeah, it was funny. I showed a friend of mine that he was like, "Oh, I'm interested in getting into horror." So I've been showing him. He lives in my hometown, so we don't get to do this as much, and he has a family now. But there was a while where he was just letting me show him all these different horror movies that I loved, and I showed him The Descent. And once the creature showed up, he's like, "Oh my God!" He's like, "We don't even need creatures. This is so terrifying and horrible already." And that's one thing I love about that movie is it just keeps raising the stakes. It keeps building on the horror. It's such
Yes.
a great movie.
It's when they turn and they're like it's through the night vision, and you or like the flashlight just like catch it. Oh my God, that just when I first started chatting with Sam, this Hell House was a book that I embarrassingly hadn't read until right before Christmas this past year. And it's one of those things, no one can see every movie that's ever been out. No one can read every book that, even if they're a beloved favorite, but like this was so good and was such a slept on book for me. Are there any that you have recently read that are like this, where it's like a classic that, so many people know about, but like just got put in front of you that you finally picked up that you would want to recommend?
Yeah, I don't know if it's one that gets talked about a lot, but in my winter horror reading list, I read a book called Maynard's House, which I think has had something. It was maybe a lesser known book. It was one that was talked about in a book called Paperbacks from Hell, that Grady Hendrix and Will Erickson put out. And it's one you hear a lot of people talk about, and similar to Hell House, it's one that has sort of mixed reviews. I think Hell House is like a 3.7 on Goodreads. I don't really I look at Goodreads, but I always say like, oh, I don't believe what they say
Yeah.
on Goodreads. And
I
I
don't
think,
believe IMDb either. It just
yeah, yeah.
was subjective.
Um, so subjective, but Maynard's House I think is a 3.6, and I was just blown away by this book. It's definitely one of those books we talked about, staying up late and reading a book and just totally connecting to a book. And it's one of those books that you close it and you're like, you look around and you're like, oh my God, like where am I? What's going on?
What time
You,
is it? Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I just felt like I was totally living in this book for for a long time, especially for that last, like that third act of the novel. I felt disoriented once I finished it and I was like walking around and I was like, oh, I got to do like normal life stuff now. And I just read this book.
That's the best feeling ever because again, like with I don't know, I feel like phones are just like zapping that imagination away from people, like to be able to be transported in a way. Reading just takes you to another world that is so different from film because you're having to use so much more of your brain. You're relying on your brain and your imagination to translate the author's words to get you into their world, that's a huge feat. And when a book can do that, like it's magic. It's
Yeah. Yeah. No, there's nothing like it. You talked about Misery being your favorite Stephen King novel. I'm curious, did you read the book first or watch the movie first? What happened first when you were first exposed to Misery?
so when I'll take it back just a little bit. When you brought up reading Stephen King for the first time in the fifth grade, and you just like had this like, I have to like this is everything feeling connected to, and I have to read everything that he has done. That was what happened with me. Now, I'm like, you can ask my mom. So my mom was a school teacher and she taught at a high school in Cleveland, and she would bring home books from the library that she was reading. And the first Stephen King book that I ever read, I didn't even know it was a Stephen King book because it was the Bachman books. It was the four short
Oh yeah, yeah.
novellas. Yeah.
Those-
So I read Rage first when I was about probably right around Good Son time, fourth, fifth grade. And I like fell in this, horror world. When I got to Misery, it was in high school, and I read the book first. And there was just something about the setup of, this author is, he's just finished this book that's really important to him, and then he gets into a car accident, and then like of course the one person who finds and helps him is a fan of his, and I just loved that there was also she's forcing him to write another book that she wants. He wants to put that character in that series to bed, and so then there's like the book within the book of Misery, but he doesn't. Sometimes Stephen King can be, he can be a little wordy, but like I felt like he kept everything at the perfect length, and it just all gelled together for me so well. And the way he built the suspense with him being in the wheelchair and having to get around the house when she would leave, it just all was so perfect for me. And I didn't see the movie until maybe like 5 years after I read the book. So I fell in love with the book first, and I think the movie is quite good. But what about you? What is your favorite? Or you can, if you had a follow-up to that question, I just talked for a really long time, so feel there's
No,
probably
I
a
so
point why you asked that.
first I wanted to say it's so funny that you mentioned your mom's a school teacher because both my parents they're now both retired teachers. My dad taught high school, my mom taught elementary school, and I think that explains why we weren't able to watch R-rated movies and
Yep.
why they didn't care what we were reading because like, oh, at least they're reading.
Yes,
Um,
that's 100%.
Actually, the reason how I got into Stephen King was in fifth grade, we had to do a state project, and I was always getting in trouble in school. And I remember, I think I was like talking out of turn, and the teacher said, "You know what, Sam? You get to choose last." So everyone chose all the good states, and I literally didn't know any other states besides Maine. I was like, "Oh, it's that one that looks like an oven mitt." So I got stuck with Maine, and I had to do a biography on someone from Maine. It was actually my mom that said, "Oh, you should do Stephen King. He's like the adult version of R.L. Stein, and you love R.L. Stein." So I did. It was interesting because while I read these biographies on Stephen King, um, I kind of got a preview of all of his work. So it definitely talked about Misery. It talked about Carrie, of course, The Shining, Salem's Lot. So I had kind of a basic knowledge of all his iconic stories before that, and this kind of leads into how I got so into kind of retro or older horror novels. Was when after that I was in fifth grade and I wanted to go to Barnes and Noble or Walden Books or Borders. Rest in peace to Walden Books and
Yeah.
Borders. But I wanted to go to pick up my first Stephen King novel, and I was telling my grandpa, and he said, "Why are you going to go to Barnes and Noble to buy a Stephen King book? Let's just go to the thrift store, the used bookstore." And we went there. The only book they had was a book called Rose Matter, which I think Stephen King published in the 90s. And for a fifth grader, uh, for those who aren't aware of Rose Matter, it is about this woman who she's married to this cop and he's very abusive. The opening scene is he pushes her down a staircase and she miscarries because of that. And she decides to steal his credit cards and run away. And he's chasing her and he's out for blood, and it was still, it was very different. Like I thought I was going to get horror, and it's definitely more of a thriller, though it has those some supernatural and horror elements. Have you read Rose Matter?
Yes, yes. That one
Yeah,
took
yeah.
a long time, but that is a heavy, heavy read for a young child.
Yeah, yeah. No, there's just so many moments that stuck with me where I was like, whoa. And especially reading, these kids' biographies about Stephen King and like actually experiencing um his writing and like him writing about domestic violence and abuse. It was really, really shocking to me. So kind of similar how you talked about being exposed to R-rated movies that we're not supposed to watch. I had that experience reading, and it was interesting because I didn't want to tell my parents about, like, there was a lot I needed to unpack there, but I didn't want to tell my parents about it because I was scared they would take the book away.
Yeah,
Um,
they would want to know why you're so invested and concerned about domestic violence. Like, where's that
yeah,
from? Yeah.
it's just unusual for a fifth grader.
So, we've been talking about books, we've been talking about jilted lovers, and we've been talking about the love of reading in general. So, if you want to delve into the more finer, nitty-gritty world of horror pulp fiction books, please be sure to check out Sam's channel, Night Nerves. Now, Sam, I have to ask you, have you started on a cover of Bob Seger's Night Moves to make it Night Nerves? Because every time I read your channel's title, I just hear Night Nerves in my
That
head.
would be, yeah, I should get someone who's much better at Photoshop than me to superimpose my face over Bob's and yeah, change the logo and everything. That's a really good, yeah. I didn't.
So if there's someone out there in the audience who's a talented musician, maybe do a rendition of Night Nerves into Night Moves, but no AI. We don't do that here. But
Yeah, yeah, no AI.
no AI. And please be sure to subscribe to Sam and Night Nerves, which you can find on YouTube. There's tons of videos that he already has ready to go for your consumption, and you will not be sorry. So thanks for staying up after midnight with us in this inaugural segment of our Midnight Book Nook.
Thank you so much, Laura. Thanks for having me.
Of course.
Working on a night moves.
Stay spooky.